Hello, and welcome to It's Already In You podcast. We are your hosts, Liz
and Janine, nutrition and movement experts, mothers and business owners, obsessed with helping you quiet the noise of diet culture.
Seeing through the false advertising and promises of our food and fitness industries, helping you discover that everything you need to upgrade your health and well-being is already in you.
It is an honor to introduce our guest today, Pat McAuley, who is an entrepreneur, a health advocate, a speaker, an author. He is an Ironman triathlete. He is a TEDx speaker, the host of his own podcast, Eat Green, Make Green podcast. He's a vegan athlete and strongly advocates for a plant-based diet. And he is the founder of Plant Athletic. And we are so excited to have him on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
If you guys only knew what just happened behind the scenes before we got this started, but we are so glad that you are here. And one reason, we were so excited to have you is because our mission of this podcast, as you guys know at home, is to really kind of reset what we're hearing day to day, whether it's through social media, whether it's through food industry, whether it's through many different avenues of just like a lot of noise and misdirection and incorrect information that is essentially leading to a tremendous amount of health problems, mental health, physical health. And so what we try to do here is to really get back to the roots, like how we are built, what our bodies need to survive. And it's relatively pretty simple. And that's where we got the name of our podcast, It's Already In You. And so dialing in versus looking out is a big belief of ours. And so much of what you've shared just through social media, I listened to your TED Talk. I know Janine's been a big fan for a long time, align with a lot of those things, plus more. So we are excited to learn. So if you can just give us a little bit about how you started out on this journey, a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that mission as well. My sort of journey started, I think, post-college. I've always been an athlete. I grew up playing sports all seasons of the year. Mm-hmm. When I got into high school, I gravitated towards football. I went on to play college football. And all through that time and growing up, I was one of 8 kids. So we ate whatever mom could cook in bulk. And that was often like ground meat with potatoes and things like that. Excuse me. And as I got serious into athletics, I followed what is still typical today, I think, a high protein, low carb sort of thinking around diet. Mm-hmm. And as I look back, I'm like, okay, why did I have that belief around food? And it was really because, every coach, every nutritionist, every sort of mentor I had as an athlete was always, protein, and that was the focus. And it prevented me from asking bigger questions about food and the impacts of food on my long-term health around that time. And I followed, again, typical athlete diet, and I was super health conscious at the time, always super fit. So anytime I went into the doctor's office or anything like that, there was never a conversation about my diet because I was never overweight or anything like that. It was eggs for breakfast, it was chicken for lunch, it was steak for dinner, maybe some potatoes or broccoli on the side every now and then. And I was, again, conscious of my health and what I was putting in my body, and I thought that was optimal for me. Yeah. And I followed that, all through my football days. And then it wasn't until a few years after college football, around the age of 25, when I found it really hard to maintain the level of fitness and how I wanted to look and feel. And, it's the definition of insanity to try the same thing over and over and expect a different result. And I just wasn't working out as an athlete at that time anymore, not 2-3 hours a day in the gym. So I found it hard and just wanted to switch things up. And I found somebody, it was not, the first person I found was not Nimai Delgado, but I found him around that time, who, for people that don't know, is a big bodybuilder, has a big social platform, And it was the first guy like I saw that was ripped and fit, and he was raised vegan. His parents were vegan, and he's never eaten meat in his life. So that got me thinking. I was like, how does this guy look that way and he's never eaten meat in his life? And that kind of opened my mind to a new way of thinking around diet. I found people like Rich Roll around that time, and I just decided to start mixing more plants in my diet. For me, that started with my breakfast. I swapped out my eggs in the morning for a green smoothie filled of greens and fruit. I had already kicked dairy and switched to almond milk at the time because I thought it was healthier. So it was really the first kind of animal-free meal, whole food, plant-based meal that I had really had when I think about it. And just how that made me feel throughout the day versus, my eggs was just night and day. And things started working differently, digestion, joint pain, things like that. And, performance-wise in the gym, going out for runs, I felt just unbelievable. And I wasn't reaching for the 2:00 coffee and things like that. And I just kind of went on this roll of a ton of green smoothies, a ton of whole plant foods. And 6 months later, I felt incredible, had gone fully plant-based, and things that I had since a little kid that I had carried inhalers for, and EpiPens for, and skin creams and pills that, were always just a Band-Aid solution to my diet and lifestyle that I was given by doctors. Those things started to go away. And that experience really shocked me because I was never presented with that option from the people I trusted. Like, these quote unquote normal things that we all have and live with day to day. Sure, if you don't want to change anything you're doing and you want to take the pill or the cream or et cetera, that's your decision.
Right.
But nobody ever said, hey, you can address what's likely causing those things, which is what you're putting in your body. So that was really kind of my path to plant-based and why I've stuck with it. And I've since learned so much and dove into all things disease reversal and prevention. And at least for me, it's very much what I believe is right for me and what will keep me healthy and high performing long term.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you said, when you said my coaches and stuff like that, were just telling me, to eat the proteins or to have that kind of like brown or diet than a lot of like color and stuff. Of course, especially young, you're going to trust the person that's like you look up to, or like when people go to doctors and they are going to just take that to kind of reframe that and be a person that communicates that to other people. It's pretty awesome.
Yes. I want to zoom in a little bit here for a second because you're an athlete, and I've listened to many of you speaking many times, and there's some things that you say that I'm always like, yes, I'm so happy to hear him say that. You speak to how one of the things that you think has affected the health in America is our big focus on protein. And like I always say in my education seminars, like macronutrients are important, but if you're eating a whole food diet, you're going to get what you need, right? But I think there's a big problem with the amount of emphasis we put on protein. So as an athlete, I'd love for you to zoom in on that for a second, share what, and I'm sure you get a lot of pushback from people on that, and how do you get your protein? And, if you could just.
Yeah. And it took me years to like get over that obsession with protein and how I looked at food. And I can say today as a, relatively high performing endurance athlete, I don't think at all about protein or macronutrients whatsoever in my day to day. And at least in my past, what macronutrients did was mislead me into making poor decisions about my long-term health. Yeah. I saw meat as protein. I didn't see meat as what it is, a dead animal, for example, with all other things that come with that protein, So I switched to looking at food as a whole, and what package does my protein come in. I also think that, we live in a world of excess.
Yeah.
Nobody is facing deficiencies. We don't have a deficiency problem.
Right.
We have an excess problem, but we're so hyper focused on deficiencies. And 0 people this year, just like last year and just like the year before, will in the Western world will die of a protein deficiency. Again, as an athlete personally that trains 15 hours a week on average, I don't think about protein. I clearly get enough protein to fuel everything I want to do and more. So for the average person who's doing their 1 hour spin class or their 45-minute workout after work or whatever, to focus on protein, in my opinion, is just a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just think it misleads people into making poor decisions. And people need to step back and look at the food as a whole, ask what it is, where it came from, what does nutrition science tell us about that food's impact on our long-term health, and that should guide people's decision. And kind of the silver lining to that for me was when you start doing that, you put your body in more of a healing state. Like you are putting your body in a state that is high performing. And what body is going to perform better and build muscle better? The one that is operating like a Swiss watch and doesn't have a lot of inflammation and a lot of crap to deal with,
Right.
or the one that consumed twice as much protein but took in all this other harmful things with that protein.
Right.
So that's kind of how I look at it. Like, I know if I provide the right stimulus, right, you have to weight train if you want to build muscle, or you have to, train as an endurance athlete if you want to get fitter as an endurance athlete. If you provide the right stimulus and you provide the right environment within your body, it is going to be way better than anything you can do, from a protein or macro standpoint to get to your goal.
Yes, I so agree with that. Like, and I feel like the education and the science backs that up, and it's just so sad that we are in a society where even the curriculum at the college university level is teaching the opposite of that, right? Or it's almost like we're scared into thinking, well, if you don't eat enough protein. I'm in a course right now, a nutrition course, and it's still a conversation about complete proteins and the quality proteins and the better than proteins, and it frustrates me so much. But I'm sitting back, and the big picture is it is a good credential and it's a good course. It's just, it makes me sad that we're still talking about that when that has been debunked, and unless you're living in a space where you have no access to a variety of foods and you're only eating rice or you're only eating beans.
Yes.
Or, if you're eating a wide variety of food, you're going to get all of the amino acids and the nutrients and the things that your body needs to function optimally.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, so working in the fitness industry, working with women, so whether it's people working to build muscle mass or definitely in the culture of women and keeping your body youthful and going through hormonal changes and stuff like that, protein is like a really, really pressed. And I feel like when I see it as like basically, a dollar sign. Somebody is trying to make money off of people's vulnerabilities. Like, you're aging, eat more protein. And it can align with like many different things that we're being told to consume to get a results that, again, is usually played off as something that we're vulnerable about or changing. But when I talk to clients one-on-one and I try to figure out why they're so passionate about specifically where I feel like it's a trend and more is eating high amounts of animal protein to stay youthful and to stay thin. I feel like they just shut down. Like they'll listen to a lot of the things that I have to say about other parts of nutrition, or they love when I suggest a supplement. It's like the quick thing, but for some reason, having that larger amount of animal protein multiple times a day equates to youthful and thin, or maybe in a man's world and women's world too, muscular. And so I know you you just spoke about that. But as you are talking to people, what do you feel like people come back at you with, being like, well, that can't actually be true?
I completely agree with you in that. Like, people come to me all the time, especially athletes that are starting out in endurance or want to do their first Ironman or something. What shoes do you wear? What bike do you ride? What zones do you train in? All this stuff. And then when I talk about diet, it's like they'll take all the other advice, but they won't take the diet advice. And I think that's why I'm able to do these things, which I find interesting. But on the longevity and the age, if you really want to focus on protein, you can focus on protein all you want.
Yeah.
But you can focus on proteins that, are not carcinogens.
Sure.
Right?
Of course.
You can up your chickpea and black bean and lentils and tofu and nuts and seeds and so if you're gonna go high protein, focus on those things. Again, back to the macro conversation.
Yeah.
People get caught up on that because then they think they're eating a quote unquote high carb diet.
Yes.
And they think, that's going to lead to weight gain and things like that. And they think that's bad for their long-term health. But, if you look at all those foods, they're associated with better health outcomes and longer lives. So I would say to not fight somebody on it. If they want to focus on protein, focus on protein.
Yeah.
But, think about the package of proteins coming in and urge them to, go for maybe the foods that actually the data shows you live longer if you eat them versus the ones that, come with the other baggage.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's like you're stepping into health. And so it's not so much the protein as it is how the protein is raised and how it lands on our table. And so that's more of the stepping toward unhealthy by making that choice. So it's not so much the protein. I just think it's just interesting because I feel like I see that all the time. And then just actually, I'm going to just stop listening to you now, which is fine. I think that sometimes too, when we start on a health journey, it's in layers. So just even turning people on to picking more responsible choices or something different, not starting that out. And I think when you start to educate yourself, some of the blinders come off that we put on or that have kind of landed on us, whether it's culturally or, through generations, and you start to see things a little bit differently. I know that any change that I've made in my life, that's usually how it starts, with a little drop and then it just kind of grows from there.
And with what you said, you started with just your breakfast and it would be one meal, one meal at a time. And
absolutely.
I think a lot of people feel better, right? They start with that one meal, or I typically have my clients just do the meatless Mondays or just do one meatless meal and just see how you feel after that. The feeling of being lighter and not weighed down. It does happen after you start to make those changes, right? But they're little changes.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of misconceptions, right? In performance and in plant-based eating. So would you say, and you already said it when you started, how this all evolved for you, is that when you began, you noticed those changes and how you felt and your performance improving and all of those things. But how many people push back on you and say, oh, you could be stronger, you could be better, you could be faster if you had animal-based protein or the more quality protein in your diet? How do you...
Yeah, I can't say I get pushback. Okay. But certainly people disagree. I mean, I've learned to just kind of do my own thing and be an example, and I try not to preach, as much as I did in my younger years when I first learned of it. But yeah, I always say to people, I started it for performance reasons, and I stuck with it for performance reasons. I agree with all the other things, and I consider myself vegan, for the other reasons as well. But, I was a 25-year-old ex-college football player, like trying to keep my six pack, right? It was very vanity driven at first, and performance driven. I've really stuck with it for the performance benefits. I just make that clear to people, and try to lead by example. And, if I can kick their ass, right, it's like they can't really say much.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I like to lead.
Yeah.
We live in a very extreme society, right? Like it's coconut oil is good for you. You're rubbing it on your skin, you're swishing it in your mouth, you're putting it in your coffee, right? If someone was to say to you, do you believe in the all or nothing? Like people have to go 100% plant-based or it's not going to do anything for them? Like what would your advice be to start out with making changes?
Yeah. I would say it depends on kind of where you're at. I think if you're in generally good health and you want to try going that way, that probably like a gradual transition is probably what's going to be best. Change breakfast to start. Do what I did. Change your whatever you have for breakfast or your first meal of the day if you do like an intermittent fasting. Just make it a whole food plant-based meal as your first meal of the day. Just that's all you got to change. Try that. Do that for a few months. See if you notice any difference. But if you're somebody that is maybe later in life or facing a health issue and or has heart disease or diabetes or any chronic disease, like you do have to be extreme. Like if you want results, you need to be extreme. And the things you've done to put yourself in that situation, in my opinion, would be extreme. And it takes extreme action to undo those things.
Yeah.
So for that person, I would recommend going all in. Like your life, in many respects, is literally on the line.
Dependent on it.
So it's go all in and give it a shot. So I think it's very much dependent on where you are, what you're trying to accomplish. The more extreme you get, the more results you're going to get. But you can certainly gradually move that direction if that's more in line with you, and probably personality related too. Like I tend to dive into things full on, and I want to know what it's about and how it feels and give it a go.
Yeah.
And make my own decision about it. So I tend to be an all or nothing person. But I know that doesn't lead to success for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you obviously speak on, plant-based. We just talked about kind of went back and forth, animal protein, plant-based. But I'm assuming this extends to all areas of your life in terms of like, I don't even know if it's the right word, clean living or responsibly living, like whether it's through, lifestyle
Conscious.
or just conscious in the choices that you make. How did that happen? Was that like a trickle down from your decision making? Were you drinking out of plastic water bottles when you were playing college football and maybe cleaning with certain things if you cleaned back then? But is it like a whole life thing now?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like it kind of naturally, like as you start thinking about it more, like I could never get past the macronutrients, right?
Yeah.
Like I never gave like in-depth, but I'm also, in my early 20s,
Sure.
With no money and like, no means to really change anything significantly from what I was doing. At least I didn't think so. So yeah, it's kind of like as I got into the world of plant-based eating and talked to more and more people, like you just become more aware and you think more critically about where your food comes from and what it is and kind of the broader impact on the world of those daily decisions.
Yeah.
So that was like a slow, another year or two long process of like just, watching videos of where, the foods I used to eat came from, specifically, factory farms and things like that. And that for me was something like when I look at that, just like I don't feel like walking into like a Walgreens, for example. Like there's nothing about walking into a Walgreens that and like picking up a prescription that feels like health to me.
Yes.
Like there's
Yeah.
nothing about it, right? And like watching like a slaughterhouse video or something, like there is nothing healthy that comes from that for me.
Sure.
In how I relate to it. So those were like a slow thing to realize for me. And yeah, and beyond that, like I don't put anything on my skin. I don't use soaps and things like that.
Yeah.
Was again a slow thing. It's like, okay, if I'm not putting these things in my body, I probably shouldn't be putting them on my body either.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely trickled out to like a very holistic, I try to put real things in and on my body and no chemicals.
Yeah.
And around you. It's amazing too.
And
how,
around you.
Yeah, when you start living that life and evolve into that, and one thing sort of goes into the next, right? It's like I just went away, and you walk into this resort, and you're like, you smell the laundry detergent and the fragrance that they have floating around to make the hotel smell better, and it all becomes a reality that you are such the minority, especially in America, that lives this way. And as wellness and health professionals and health promotion advocates, like it's so important to see that big picture, right? Because nutrition, I would say, is probably the most important because it's how your body functions. Your cells are, dependent on those nutrients. But there is such a big picture, like from sleep and from, again, the products that we are using. So it's hard to, you go down this road with clients or with people that you are trying to help, and there's so much, it's like taking it layer by layer, but I think it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like overall health. Have you traveled? I'm assuming you have. Have you traveled a lot, like to other countries and throughout America, and seen like kind of the playing field of health, like the different kind of impacts, I guess? I always think of it as like the dollar bill, like what's driven from like the people above us. And in America, I lived in Europe for a couple of years. The priority was much more health-based. We aren't going to give the people who live here as much like crap because we can identify that it's not going to be a positive. In fact, it's going to be a negative in their overall health. And so coming back to the United States after having that experience for a couple of years was like, my eyes were like wide open, like where they weren't quite so much. I can remember going over and we lived in Slovenia and like picking up the food from the market, and it was all dirty and I'm being like, this is dirty. Like I can't eat this. And my husband was like, yeah, because it came from the ground, like probably a couple miles down the street. And like everything, just like overall, like just lifestyle. But I'm curious, like as you've traveled for work and for pleasure and as an athlete, how you see that change, your mission, your I guess your purpose and in a lot of what you do, how that changes in different areas.
Yeah, I think like plant-based, speaking on plant-based has come a long way.
Yeah.
Like, even just 5 years ago, it was like LA, New York, some of the more progressive cities. And then when you got beyond that, it was kind of like a ghost town.
Yeah.
And you really had to go out of your way to find good options, or you were at least hoping there was like a juice bar or something in the in the neighborhood. And that's certainly gotten way better as I've traveled for sure. But also like, as long as I can get to a grocery store that's like at all reasonable.
Yeah.
And I can get rice and beans and fruit, like I'm good.
Yeah.
And even when I travel to do an Ironman in Europe or a different country, that's all I need.
Yeah.
And Europe, absolutely, I can agree. Like, and I think all of us have had the experience of going to Europe and like eating bread and pasta and things like that and feeling so much better after you have it than like the pasta here in the US. And I think that's very real. I mean, if you just look at their laws around food, it's way stricter.
Yes.
Like if I do take supplements too, I tend to order them from Europe because it's way more regulated and I feel much better about what I'm getting. But yeah, it's come a long way, but I also think it's still going the other way in many respects. And, the if you look at the numbers, right, like meat consumption's only going up worldwide. And yeah, I hope over time that'll continue to change, but I do think like the forces against plant-based have been just as strong as the plant-based movement itself.
Yeah.
It depends where you are.
Depends where you are, yeah.
You just like flooded my brain with a bunch of questions now that I have to and some thoughts. But the Olympics announced that they're plant-based or mostly going plant-based for their athletes this year. Did you hear of that? And what do you think? Do you think that was more of a like
it's a sustainability play?
Okay.
When I see those, like in like, you see it at like the sustainability conferences and things like that, where, maybe they're calling it athlete well-being, which is great if that's genuine, but I think most of those are trying to like check their sustainability box and not get like pushback from sponsors and things like that to be, cutting down their carbon footprint and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I also think too, it's very athlete to athlete. So I don't know how impactful. It's awesome. It's awesome that they even are highlighting that.
Well, it's nice that they're saying like there won't be any French fries and chicken nuggets and Chick-fil-A at the Olympics. But I mean, I'm sure that even in Paris, the Chick-fil-A is probably, if there is one there, healthier than it is.
The McDonald's is right around the corner from where everybody's staying too, so it's like, it's great. It's great that
What would you say, because there's obviously a big movement and it's the mighty dollar and we know the investors in it, but there is a lot of push for this fake meat and that they're playing that sustainability card with it. And I mean, I've always been like whole foods, like if you're going to make the transition, don't replace this with that. But there are some plant-based eaters and experts that believe that is still better than getting the animal protein. So how would you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, right? If your goal is health or disease reversal or performance, that like, the Beyond Meats and the Impossibles, like you don't want to live there. That's not going to be like a staple product in your diet.
Right.
I do certainly, there's obviously all the environmental benefits that I completely agree with of those products. And obviously the animal equality benefits and all that. But I will still take an Impossible burger over a beef burger any day of the week from a health standpoint. I do think it's better than. Okay. It's not, and there's been a few studies that have come out, on that comparing, beef burgers to Beyond an Impossible burger. And, you're still not getting saturated fat. You're still not getting cholesterol. You're still not getting hormones and all the things that come with a raised animal and not knowing where that animal comes from. So I do think it's better than. Yeah. And that's kind of how I look at it, but it's not like, you don't want to be eating those products every day. Yeah. You treat them as a treat. Like I treat it like how I treat beer. Yeah. It's like, I love a good beer and I love a burger on the 4th of July. Yeah. And I'll have my Impossible burger then and I'll have my beer then, but it's a once in a while special occasion. It's not a staple food.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Just touching on that, on the studies for a second, because sometimes it is the producer or the big business, the big ag that are putting out those studies or are sponsoring those studies. So, have you seen the bigger picture and know that there is definite science out there that is not manipulated by anybody that's showing that?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because obviously the people that are doing the studies to show like plant-based meat is better, just like our argument on the plant-based side with like big meat of them funding all the studies, right? Yeah, it's the same argument on both sides. Right. So it is tough to like parse out and get real information. But yeah, I mean, at least the ones I've seen, right? Like blood pressure is lower in the plant-based meat versus animal-based meat. Other, factors related to overall health and longevity are better and more in line. But again, you're comparing like, a bad do a bad in my opinion.
Right, right.
So
I know, and it's the big picture. Like, I think a lot of times when people come to you and say, "Oh, should I take a protein supplement or eat this bar or, do this superfood item?" And it's like, well, and then you look at the rest of the diet, and you're like, "Can we start with just eating real food, instead of adding all these other, taking away these other things?" But then there's people that you work with that it's really the better than option that you have to start with because they're just so far to one side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that resonated with me when I watched your TED Talk was I think most people have moments with mental health or emotional health or, valleys and peaks with that. And you had highlighted that you were angry or you had more I don't want to say outbursts, but felt a little not quite as settled as you do emotionally or maybe mentally as you do now. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that, the mind side of it, the energetic side of your lifestyle changes.
I appreciate you asking that because it's either too woo-woo for the podcast
yes.
People don't like asking me that.
Yes, no. Mental health is a huge thing that I personally try to wrap into a lot of what I do. So I'd love to learn a little more. Yeah,
the way I think about it, right, is that if you break everything down to its core, right, everything is energy. Mm-hmm. And again, I know that's woo-woo, but that's reality.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that's becoming less woo-woo.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. And it's again, especially with how food is animals are raised in the U.S. The life of the typical burger you're eating, the cow, is a really miserable experience. Confined to small spaces, fed garbage food, never seeing sunlight, ultimately killed in a very brutal manner. And you are taking that animal and you're putting it in your body. If you look at Einstein, for example, right, he said energy doesn't dissipate, it transfers. And everything is a transfer of energy, whether you give somebody a hug or you're eating food, there's a transfer of energy that happens there. And when what you're putting in your body was raised in that manner, it's my belief that all that stress, all that fear, all that anxiety, all that, as I like to say, dis-ease comes with that. Mm-hmm. And that's what's in your body, whether you like it or not, whether you believe that or not. And at least for me and the many people over the years that I've interviewed that have had similar transitions to more plant-based diets like myself, they speak of a very similar experience where they were just calmer. Maybe that's blood pressure going down, maybe, whatever it is. Yeah. But I just felt calmer. I felt more at ease. I felt better able to connect with my loved ones, a little more open about sharing things. Again, I don't know why that is, but that's what I attribute it to as I've, again, spoken with others and thought more critically about it. I think it's very hard to be at peace when you put all that stress and fear and anxiety in your body. Yeah. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, this is kind of similar, but I believe I can see my energy transferred to my children. I can see, I carried them and I can see how that connection, so being kind of inside, and cellular and all of that stuff, I feel like it's very real. And so when I look kind of at our society as a whole, there is so much mental health from children all the way up, struggles and quick stops to Walgreens to get those pills to help calm whatever is going on with people. And I know for sure there's many reasons that people arrive at those spaces, but what we're putting into our body can create some of that, not even have a negative, but actually create some of that turmoil that our body's fighting through. So we feel it physically, we feel it emotionally, we feel it mentally. And I think that there is a big disconnect with our mental health, our emotional health, and what we're putting into our body. We can see, we're eating poorly, I might gain weight, or I'm eating poorly, I might feel sluggish. Like, I think that physical connection is there, but still as like a whole, really understanding that eating processed foods, hormones, antibiotics, food that was not raised kindly or responsibly, absolutely impacts our overall energy, our mental health, the way that we feel when we get up. Of course, if we get up in the morning and our joints are swollen and we're feeling icky physically from our diet, of course we're feeling that mentally too, emotionally, in our relationships. Like, it's very clear to me, but I still feel like that can kind of sound woo-woo to some people, or maybe they're not ready to kind of peel back those layers.
Yeah. But have you ever read Organic Manifesto?
No.
So Maria Rodal, I don't know, you know the Rodal Institute? They're like the Reader's Digest. I think they were the creators of that, but they are the first organic farming in the country, and they're in Pennsylvania. I have a family friend that is there right now doing an internship, and she is loving it. But one of the things it was one of the first books I read when I started my nutrition education and research, but even the way that we're farming in America is disconnecting everything from each other, and it's messing with nature, right? So if you impact nature, if you take a farm, if you look back hundreds of years ago, the way that we would farm, it was the animals that fertilized the ground, that the agriculture would grow from, and everything there, the hens laying eggs, and everything there had an input to everything else. And now we grow one crop, or we raise one animal, or it's industrialized, so there's like a huge disconnect to the way that nature intended things to work. So you can imagine that too probably plays a role in this energy of we're disconnecting everything from one another and causing all of this turmoil in the way that we're naturally supposed to be.
Yeah, it's for me at least, it's a very different experience when I go out to the garden and bring in some kale versus I go to Whole Foods and get some kale that was grown in California and shipped over the past 2 days and probably sat there another day, right?
Yeah.
That's a different experience. And I think, I agree with you, probably different energy around that. And I also agree with like the whole mental health thing. And I think if you really think about it, it's very obvious, right? It's like, how do you feel in the morning after, a burger and 3 beers, right? The next morning, like, it's a lot harder to feel good about yourself and, feel good versus if you got to bed on time, you had a great healthy dinner, you woke up, you got out and went for a run, like a whole different day in mental perspective. So if you can stack the healthy days, one after the other and kind of get some momentum, like you notice a lot more the days when you do go off track. It really throws you off, and you're like, I don't want to do that. I'll do that on Christmas and 4th of July maybe, but I don't like I don't like that feeling.
It's not worth it.
And once you get that momentum, it definitely, you notice how those things impact you more.
Yeah. So one thing we talk a lot about is, and see as like a hurdle for people, is just like spending time cooking in the kitchen, whether they have a garden or they're going to the market, whatever it may be. But that time and this like constant go and convenience is, whether it's an excuse or a hurdle or whatever it may be for people, that is what, a lot of people are like, but I can't food prep, or I don't like to cook, or I don't, have the time to really think about this because I have, kids, or have this like demanding career or whatever. I'm just not into it. I know that that's just like, no, I know that that's not real, because there's a lot of things that we can do and choose to fit into our lifestyle versus like uprooting our lifestyle to fit into something else. But what would you say to someone who maybe is saying that, like, okay, well, this is overwhelming to me. I know you had said like start small, start with something in the morning, but how do you prepare your food? How do you carve out time to make sure that you are like opening the fridge and there's something there for you, and you don't necessarily need to just grab the thing because your blood sugar's crashing or whatever.
Yeah. People say they don't have time, and eventually your body is going to make you have the time.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to. And that's how I kind of think about it. You pay for it later, and you're going to have to spend time eventually when, sickness comes.
Sure.
Hopefully not, but is kind of the way I look at it. But yeah, this is like a funny one because like everybody thinks like I have all these elaborate meals and things like that. And it is so basic and so like college dorm room eating that it would I think it surprises people. But literally I'll have rice. If I get a big bag of rice, I cook it once, I have it like for the week in the fridge, or I just buy like the minute rice packets, or quinoa or whatever.
Sure.
I make sure you can, make sure you get the right ones, that it's literally just rice and not a bunch of oils and things with it. So I'll always have a few of those in the pantry. I always have cans of beans. I always have like burrito wraps, like just, organic flour burrito wraps. Mm-hmm. I always have hummus. I always have a good dressing. And then from there, it's kind of like what vegetables we either picked up throughout the week or got from the garden in the summer, which has been fun, that I kind of add in. Usually I always have tofu in there. And I end up with a big bowl or a big burrito of all that stuff, like for 90% of my meals.
Yeah.
And like from a convenience perspective, I know people don't look at it this way.
Yeah.
But we have fast food all over the place as whole food plant-based eaters. If I need something on the go, like I grab an apple, I grab a few bananas, I grab a bag of nuts. Like it's way easier than people think.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of thought put into it. Yes, I do my weekly shopping run just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And I know the area I live in, the places I need to go to if I'm in Boston or if I'm in my area. And yeah, I don't put much, we're not whipping up like lentil loaves and pad thai every night and things like that. Like once in a while, on the weekends if we want to spend some time. But other than that, literally like the college kid can do this.
Yeah.
Rice, beans, hummus, some vegetables.
Yeah.
Like that's where I live 90% of the time. Otherwise it's fruit and nuts.
Yeah. I love that because I think we overcomplicate it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people that I am connected with that have a healthy food choices, healthy lifestyle, it really isn't that complicated, which again goes back to our mission of our show. It's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
Like anytime you take on something new, you have to learn about it. In the beginning, it might feel a little bit like extra work, or you're thinking a little bit like, okay, here, because it's going to be different. But like anything in life that our body responds to can't be too complicated. It can't create stress because then we're probably not going to do it for very long. Like, if you were making pad thai every night in the kitchen, you might be like, this kind of sucks. I want to sit outside or go for a walk or whatever, and start to form a relationship with that feels like more of like a job than something that you get to do for yourself, that you get to do. So I love that you said that. I was hoping that you weren't going to be like, well, I have a degree, I'm a culinary chef.
I have a chef at home that takes care of that.
Yeah. I think that's important for people to hear, though, that you don't need a ton of money. You don't need a ton of time. You just need, a want, some education, and then just like some consistency.
Well, and then
really
again,
hard for a lot of
it's
people.
social media and it's the noise again, right? Like you see these chops and the sound effects and they create these crazy, amazing looking meals in like 30 seconds, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, and on top of that, they're like, oh, and put recipe in the comments and we'll send it to you. And I'm like, recipe, and that's how I think most people feel. Like, I don't have the time to do that. I don't even know how to chop like that, right? And then again, going back to the basics and just grabbing an apple or a handful of almonds or any other nut, and how good it feels to just be able to do that. And it's not, it didn't take any time to make. It doesn't have any ingredients other than what it is. And I think we want, or we expect that it needs to be so much more than that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? To be something that's better for you. Well, there's got to be like a You got to be able to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
something with that.
Yeah.
or-
It's got to be those like goji berries sourced from the Amazon.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how you're doing it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's like-
Yeah. No, it's not actually. Yeah. So tell us what you're up to now. What's your day like in turn? I don't know if it's
Yeah.
a job, a mission. Like I'm
Goals,
assuming
projects.
like what are you up to?
Yeah,
as you grow?
well, I've been excited. I've been getting back into my podcast a little bit, which I've been really, really excited about because I took a lot of time off from it. So I'm excited to get back into that and have some new interesting episodes rolling out. And I've been focusing just because it's like kind of my evolution into what gets me excited. It's been like a lot of like performance focused guests and things like that that'll be coming soon. But yeah, podcast. And then, I started Plant Athletic that you guys mentioned earlier, which was really, again, kind of a passion project as I became an endurance athlete and just wanted a, training kit that I felt comfortable about. Again, going back to the kind of conscious consumption, especially in endurance sports. And it is very wasteful. People literally will wear one suit for a competition and throw it out.
Yeah.
I really wanted to create something, one that like lasted. It was built to last. It wasn't made as like, you see the Nike super shoes and things like that. Like you wear them 10 times and then like they're done.
Yeah.
Like they're meant to race in and then you throw them out. So we wanted to create something that was built to last, but also made from recycled materials and ultimately plant-based materials. Wow. So kind of like what we see the next evolution in clothing is also taking into account human health. Okay. So it's not just planetary health, it's wearing organic plant-based materials on your body. A lot of the materials that are coming out now are like castor bean based, which is pretty interesting. And there's all these new advancements with biotechnology and fermentation, similar to, things that are happening in alt protein and clean meat and things like that, that are giving us the ability to take things like castor beans and plant-based materials and make performance materials with them. And even ones that will biodegrade, that if they end up in a low oxygen environment, in a landfill and things like that, which is really cool, I think, too. But just especially as athletes and even as women in your yoga pants and things like that we wear all day long for hours and hours, we should probably be, again, going back to putting things on your skin, especially if you're sweating in them and you're moving in them all the time. What's kind of seeping into your skin? Are there some negative health effects? And there's certainly been some things I've seen that have raised my eyebrows on that front. So I think the more we can move to organic, plant-based performance materials as athletes, I think that's awesome. Right now, we're fully recycled, and we're kind of in experimental phase with kind of the newer materials. But yeah, we do primarily cycling and triathlon gear right now. We're launching a run category in the fall, and have an awesome team, and just super excited about it. And maybe even get into some plant-based endurance fuel in the future as well. So that's what I'm focused on. That's what I'm excited about, and ultimately, like, what I want to use it for is to inspire people to get out moving more and putting better things in their body. And kind of at its core is really just the mission of getting people moving, eating better, and hopefully that translates to spending more years on earth with the people they love. And that's really like at the core of it.
Yeah, that's amazing, Pat. I think thank you for all the advocacy you're doing to change people's lives for the better. I think that, it's always in us to want to see people do better, but you have basically devoted your life to these changes for people and to educate people. And I hope that it's appreciated by your listeners as much as it should be, because you are doing many things that are improving lives.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We are super happy that you came. Is there, tell people where they can find you. Tell people.
Yep. At Eat Green, Make Green on social media, Eat Green, Make Green podcast, eatgreenmakegreen.com. and then plantathletic.com.
Awesome. And we will link all of that below. In addition, you can find us, of course, at It's Already In You. On Instagram, you can listen to us, which you are probably right now, on Spotify or Apple Music. And then you can always email us. You'll find that on our Instagram link. If you have any questions or feedback, this has been such an honor for us to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I
As a
appreciate it.
student of self and as someone in a like field of health and wellness, I am definitely leaving inspired today. So thank you for that.
Me too. We appreciate you.
Likewise.